Earlier today, I spoke with a senator who knows a thing or two about creating jobs. Take a listen. Not very far from here, hundreds, even thousands of young people are protesting against Washington, D.C., and against the banks, against Wall Street, against the relationship between them. A senator from Wisconsin who understands that relationship, a self-made businessman, sometimes critical of it, is here to chat with us now. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Welcome to what would be a balmy day by Wisconsin standards.
Oh yeah, I'm almost sweating here.
Should the angst in Lower Manhattan, directed by young people at Wall Street, really be directed at the big government central planners in Washington?
Yes, I mean, and both. You know, we do need to separate manufacturers and the people that make things and, you know, do service for folks around the country from the big money center banks and certainly from Washington. I mean, it's really those two entities that really created the problems, and it really starts in Washington, quite honestly.
Did you ever think that you would see the day when the government would take tax dollars from all of us and give it to its big friends in business and in banking whose businesses were failing? Tax dollars that the government takes from us, extracts from us, given to these bankers and businessmen to shore up their failing businesses.
Well, unfortunately, that's been the progression, and I guess, yeah, we have been seeing that. Certainly been seeing it during my lifetime. It's unfortunate. It obviously doesn't work. I mean, the exhibit A of that is the cylinder example, you know, which we really, basically, that's a $500 million photo op, you know, with the crony capitalism. That behavior has to end because, Judge, we can't afford it. I mean, what $1.3 trillion deficit this year, $4 trillion in the last 3 years, we simply can't sustain this type of behavior.
How I wish that a majority of the Senate agreed with you, because Senator Johnson, it's October 3rd. Last Friday was September 30th, the end of the federal government's fiscal year. They spent billions in one afternoon, because if they didn't give it away, they would lose it. We might not find out for months to whom billions and billions of our tax dollars went. Question, is that any way to run a government?
No, it absolutely is not, Judge. You know what? One thing I repeat, and a lot of us repeat, the fact that the United States Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 2 years. Now, with this debt ceiling agreement, they deemed one. Bing, you know, now we have a budget. Right. And as a result, now they're trying to rush through all kinds of appropriations bills. And that's a process as an accountant, as a small business person who's actually created budgets, balanced them, actually had surpluses. You come and take a look at the way this budgetary process simply doesn't even work. I mean, it is shocking.
You must have been in for a culture shock when you, an entrepreneur, a self-made businessman, a person who risked his own money, who borrowed money from others and risked theirs and was able to pay them back, walked into a bunch of politicians who take tax revenues and borrowing for granted and think they can spend it any way they want.
Well, I do bring a slightly different perspective. There's no doubt about that. And, you know, when I first got it, right after I got sworn in, people would say, you know, so is it worse than you thought? Well, I knew it was pretty bad. So originally I would say, no, it's not worse. But now that we've actually gotten this appropriations process, Judge, it's far worse. It's far worse.
Why is it that the Senate hasn't passed a budget? Why is it that the government funds itself for weeks at a time? You didn't run your business that way. Fox doesn't run that way. NBC doesn't run that way. No business could operate that way. Only the government.
Yeah, well, it's because it's controlled by the Democrats. And I don't believe the Democrats are really sincere in their desire to actually limit the size of government. You know, develop a credible spending plan. If they would have been, they would have passed a budget, but they don't want to show the American people. You know, when President Obama, after the Boehner deal, you know, ended up resulting in an S&P downgrade, he came out and said, hey, you know, I wanted the grand bargain. Well, President Obama, if you wanted a grand bargain, you know, why didn't you put that in your 2012 budget? Why didn't you force the members of your party in the Senate to actually pass a budget to show the American people what type of, you know, credible spending plan you have? The fact of the matter is, all they want to do is protect their programs. They want to protect Obamacare. They want to make sure that thing keeps marching forward. I don't know why. It's going to destroy a health care system and blow a hole in our budget.
Well, are Republicans serious about wanting to shrink the government, or do they just want to shrink the size of the growth in government, which doesn't shrink it at all?
Well, what we need to do, realistically, is shrink the size of government in relationship to the size of our GDP. And, of course, the best way of doing that is grow the economy. So we've got to make sure that any type of legislation that we pass in Congress doesn't do harm to economic growth. But no, I mean, we got in this problem, Judge, over decades. It's going to take us years to get out of it, but that's one of the reasons cut, cap, and balance made a lot of sense. Real cuts to lower the baseline, cap statutorily and then put a constitutional limitation, a fiscal discipline enshrined in the Constitution, is the only way we're going to get control of this beast.
The president is still touting his jobs bill, and he's getting very, very dramatic and very passionate. In one respect, it's nice to see him believing in something, even though what he's believing in would be a disaster if it came about. It would waste money. Where's that going to go?
Well, give credit to some Democrats in the Senate. They think they're calling it dead on arrival, basically. His budget judge, think of this, lost 0 to 97 in the United States Senate. Not one Democratic senator supported his plan. Now there's a bunch that are bailing on this jobs program because they realize that we've already borrowed too much, that the government spends too much, and they're not willing to support the president's jobs program.
Senator Johnson, I have argued on this show, Freedom Watch, that some of the borrowing too much and spending too much is the fault of Republicans as well as Democrats. Now, we know there are big government Republicans in the Congress. I'm not going to ask you to name any names because you have to work and live with these people. But do we really have one big government party in Washington with a Democratic wing that's really big and a Republican wing that's sort of big, but both of them believe that government should grow and government can create jobs and government can solve our problems rather than, like I think you and I, government should get out of the way?
Absolutely. Well, let's face it, I wasn't happy when the Republicans were spending, $200, $300, $400 billion more than we were taking in back in the early part of the 2000s. But the fact of the matter is, last time the Republicans controlled Congress, our deficit was $162 billion. Too large, but the next year when the Democrats took charge, it was $450, then $1.4 trillion, $1.3 trillion, and $1.3 trillion. So we've gone an order of magnitude in terms of lack of spending control in this current Congress. And let's face it, the Democrats really are the party of entitlement. They are the party of out-of-control government. And at least Republicans, by and large, want to try and restrain that.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the Supercommittee. Did you ever think that you would be a member of the United States Senate and suddenly the legislative power, the power to debate, the power to offer amendments, the power to challenge would be taken away from you and given to some select committee that only has 6 senators on it and that would meet in secret and that you couldn't even find out what they were talking about until after their report comes out? Where the heck is that in the Constitution?
Well, I have to admit, I feel like I've been sitting on the sidelines a little bit for the last 8 months. But that's one of the reasons I sent a letter, had my staff take a look at what other work people had already done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We came up in a week with $1.4 trillion worth of reductions in the rate of growth and spending, and that's all we're really talking about here. Nothing draconian, just common sense approaches, borrowing from the Debt Commission, from Senator Tom Coburn, from the Grace Commission, from there's a bunch of people who have already done work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's pretty easy to cut $1.5 trillion.
But when this committee comes back with its opinion, are you guys really going to sit on your hands and just say yes or no? Or is there going to be real meaningful debate and challenge? What about this? What about that? Where'd you come up with this?
The process has been set up for a 51-vote majority to pass it. So, again,
which party in the Senate has the 51-vote majority?
I know. I voted no. I didn't like the deal.
Before I let you go, can the president just kill an American without due process of law, as the Constitution requires?
Well, Judge, when they're an illegal combatant, which is what
Don't
a lot
let
of
me
people...
down on
I understand, and we may have some differences. I certainly want to make sure that the groundwork's there and there's actually court approval for something like this. But the fact of the matter is, we are in a different time in terms of, state-sponsored, Islamic terrorism, a real threat to this country. And you have to take some nasty measures, I'm afraid. And we may be part differences a little bit on that.
All right. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Back to a warm studio and more Freedom Watch.